Yokohama, Japan, a land of contrast where whispers of spirits linger alongside the hum of modern life. Our tale today introduces a man of logic, a journalist hardened to superstition by an appetite for hard facts and a penchant for dismissing the impossible. But in a small, peculiar house on the hill, he is about to encounter something beyond belief. Join him, if you dare, into a world where the line between the living and the dead is as thin as a paper wall in The Quest of the Obake, written by Whitfield Fegen in 1895.
I'd never believed in ghosts. In my early youth, my parents had most carefully instilled into me the doctrine of their non-existence. Later on, I had sought them without success, and once spent several nights alone, quite without result, in a remote Devonshire manor house, in which no one would dwell and for which no tenant could be found on account of its terrible reputation. Furthermore, I had sought the Maori taniwha and the Australian bunyip in their native lairs without success, and had looked in vain for Siamese phi, Burmese gnats and Malay hantu in ruined temples and jungles. Consequently, I was disposed to look on all ghosts as the results of a disordered liver or of diseased nerves. Nowadays, however, I'm not so sure about their existence or lack thereof, and I'm inclined to think that Hamlet may not have been entirely wrong in challenging Horatio's views on the supernatural. This is how the change came about. It was just at the close of the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895. Peace had been declared, for which I, as a press correspondent, was not altogether sorry, as the latter stages of the game, culminating in the suicide of poor old Admiral Ting at Wei Hai Wei, had not been very lively, and the weather had been atrocious. I was, and always had been, taken with Japan as a delightful place of residence, and so when I was offered a post as sub-editor on one of the Yokohama papers, the Japan Daily Advertiser, I made no bones about accepting it, as it would give me a chance of attaining some insight into the domestic life of a people of whose military genius, patriotic spirit and devotion I had seen a great deal. And so, ensconced in one of the quietest of the Yokohama hotels, I tackled my new duties, reading the somewhat copious literature on Japan in my ample spare hours, and doing my best to get, what no foreigner has ever yet gained, a true insight into the people themselves. It was a pleasant existence, broken by little excursions into the country, yachting trips on the bay and rambles through the streets of curio shops and bazaars, but rendered still more pleasant by an acquaintance I'd made at the hotel in the person of a young Englishman, who, strangely enough, occupied a precisely similar position to mine on a rival paper. Harrison had been all over the world and seen men and things. I flattered myself that I had done the same. Both of us were of an energetic bent, both interested in things Japanese, and we both professed a confirmed disbelief in the supernatural and all appertaining thereto. And so, before long, we were both working together, an arrangement at which our respective editors looked askance at first, until they found that it led to splendid results. We studied the Japanese tongue together and disturbed our neighbours by mighty bouts at jiu-jitsu and kenjitsu, a Japanese two-handed swordplay, in which we were both taking lessons from the best professionals available.
Aha!
Quoted my editor one morning as I entered the office.
That's a fine black eye you've got. Been thrown out of a rikisha? That's the usual story.
No, I got this from Harrison. I replied mildly.
Ha ha ha,
roared my chief.
Thought it wouldn't last. You chaps were too friendly altogether. Who's the lady involved?
And meanwhile a similar scene was taking place in the office of the Japan Daily Herald, to which my Fidus Achates, or my faithful friend, had gone with his wrist bandaged up and a scar on his cheek. Of a truth, the jiu-jitsu had been a bit lively the previous evening, and a fall over a stone had hurt both of us somewhat. After a few days' rest, however, we were at it again. It was during these few days that Harrison remarked,
"Look here, old man. I'm rather tired of this hotel life. The same thing day after day. Same idiotic globetrotters, same bar loafers, same everything. Why shouldn't we two take a house and bachelorize? We should save a lot of expense, do just what we like, and have nobody to growl at us for kicking up too much noise or damaging the furniture."
We talked it over and decided to try the experiment as soon as we found a place which suited our tastes and pockets, and promised to stay on the lookout for a good place to live. One day, strolling on the bluff, as the hill which overlooks the town of Yokohama and forms the favourite residential area of foreigners is called, I found our ideal house. It was quite a picturesque little place of what is called Inoko construction, or, in other words, half European and half Japanese. It had all the rooms we were ever likely to want, located in the shadow of an ancient temple embowered in cryptomeria and other trees. It had an interesting little Japanese landscape garden and commanded a panoramic view of Tokyo Bay, the town of Yokohama, and the adjacent country, with the peerless Mount Fuji rising in the distance. It was just the very thing. And when the monban, or caretaker, had told me that the rent demanded was ridiculously moderate in amount, I rushed off post-haste and brought my chum in triumph to inspect my find, over which he grew equally enthusiastic, and we dispatched the monban to a neighbouring yadoya or ryokan for sundry bottles of beer and glasses, and pipe in mouth decided on our respective bedrooms, etc. This room would serve capitally as dining and general workroom of this. We would pad the floor and the lower part of the walls with Japanese straw mats for our jiu-jitsu, in that we would stable our bikes, etc. And as it was too late to see the landlord that evening, I was to do so in the morning, and get a lease of the place for 12 months at least. Oh, yes, we were lucky indeed. It was after dinner that evening that the talk fell upon ghosts. Harrison read the account in Chamberlain's Things Japanese of the Obake and Kitsune, the badger and the fox, two animals gifted with mighty supernatural powers which crop up perpetually in Japanese history, romance and drama. The Obake, or badger, is accredited with the power of assuming after nightfall the form of a man, captivating fair wandering damsels and leading them to destruction. The kitsune, or fox on the other hand, transforms him or herself into the resemblance of a beauteous maiden, gets into the path of susceptible man, and likewise proves his swift and sure ruin. Although these beliefs are by no means the only ones of the kind, they are the most universally believed in, and it is absolutely astonishing to find how widespread they are, even amongst the educated classes. There was a little knot of half a dozen or so of us lounging in long chairs on the hotel veranda and enjoying the postprandial smoke when the discussion started. An American globetrotter told a story of a kind of werewolf which had infested a district in Omaha. Then a missionary on a trip to Japan to regain his health after a 10 years residence in a tropical isle told us how an apparition of an immense luminous skull had cleared out an entire village of semi-cannibals, and how the said skull had turned out to be merely a huge fungus sprouting from a tree trunk. And so on, until Harrison said,
Queer, isn't it, that such eminently practical people as the Japanese should have such beliefs? Look at their army organisation. Look at their Murata rifles. Look at the men of war they are building for themselves. Only yesterday I went into a little pokey watchmaker's shop in Bentendori. A little wizened old chap was tinkering with what looked like parts of a phonograph. I said politely, that Edison's a clever man, isn't he? The reply came,
I do not think him very clever. He was not the real inventor of the phonograph. It was Graham Bell. Edison improved it. Now I am improving on that of Edison, and it will be 1,000 times better, and can be sold at half price.
And the old chap charged me about a penny 3 farthings for putting in a new watch glass, and showed me some designs for a dirigible torpedo, which he said he was going to make when he had money enough. Yet all the time he was talking, there were 2 little white plaster foxes with bits of red rag around their necks squatting on a shelf over his head in order to keep the devils out, or something of that sort. It's queer that such a clever people should slick to these old-world superstitions.
And we agreed it was and gradually departed. Early the next morning I made my way to the landlord of what Harrison and I had agreed to call the Hutch. There was no reason for this, save that everyone else in Yokohama seemed to give their houses the most malapropos names possible. After I had stated my errand, the landlord, with much efflorescent oriental verbiage, said,
It is impossible, most good sir, for the humble domicile in question was let to another yesterday.
He could not even say who the new tenant was, but described him as a dark-complexioned elderly man who had, without a murmur, paid 3 months' rent in advance, and then I did very wrong and offered him double the 3 months' rent to explain that it was a mistake and turn the new tenant out in our favour, as well as 25% increase in rent for the balance of a year. For we really wanted that house badly, but the landlord was firm. He had given his word and would not depart from it, he said. Perhaps we might arrange with the new tenant. Then, and in consideration of the additional 25% of rent, he would have no objection. But I, disappointed, left in a huff, and then, well, things went on as before. It was about a week or 10 days after we had sustained this check to our designs that I had to visit our composing room on one of those errands connected with the issue of a daily paper which makes sub-editors grey before their time. I interviewed Dos Santos, our Portuguese foreman compositor, a respectable man and a staunch Catholic, and had a huge family like a flight of stairs. As I was leaving, he said,
"Excuse me, sir, but didn't you say the other day that you were looking for a house?"
I admitted that I might have done so, and then told him about the disappointment my friend and myself had had. He looked somewhat startled for a minute, and then said,
"It's curious, sir, but it was I who took that house.
Then he added after a brief hesitation,
And now I want to get away."
"Why?" I exclaimed. "I thought it would just suit you. Cheap rent, plenty of room, and you a man with a big family. What's wrong with it? Bad water, leaky roof, typhoid drains, quarrelsome neighbours, or ghosts?"
"Yes, sir."
He answered gravely.
"Don't laugh at me. It's just that. It's ghosts. I'm not afraid of them myself, but my family are frightened to stop there. They say they won't, and they surely mean it. They won't stop, sir."
"But what worries them? What have they seen or heard?"
"That's part of the trouble, sir. They won't say that they've seen or heard anything, just that there are ghosts, and they won't stay. And my wife and eldest son are as bad as the little ones. I don't know what to do. Probably some of the neighbors have been setting them against the house, but it's a fact that for some years past no tenants have stayed more than a week or two in it. One of the priests at the temple at the back, to whom I spoke about it, said that he had heard that there was an Obake there."
I laughed. "And you, a good Catholic, believe in all that rubbish?" I cried. "I thought you had more sense. But I'll speak to Jim Harrison about it and let you know later," which same I did, at tiffin time. Jim said he'd lay the ghost or get laid out in the effort, and that was what I told Dos Santos that afternoon. Also that if he would lend us a couple of futons and keep his family upstairs until daylight, we would settle his ghost for him. He promised to do his share. I got away from the office early that day and informed his wife of what we were going to do. From her I learned what I had failed to draw from her husband, to wit, that every morning between 1 and 3 o'clock a strange, illuminated figure appeared in one of the downstairs rooms, and after moving about for a while, vanished, none knew whither. No, she had not seen it herself, but that was the story, and both she and 2 of her daughters had seen the strange, bluish light which accompanied the figure reflected on the side of the staircase. A Japanese neighbour, a smart young man who had been a soldier, told the same tale. He had never seen it, and with a shrug didn't want to. No, he wasn't afraid, but if it was really an Obake, it was best left alone. He had never seen an Obake, but his great-grandmother's sister, who lived in Heisen province, had been thrown or led by one over a precipice. I listened to all this and more with some amusement, but it must be admitted that my nerves were slightly a-tingle as Harrison and I reached my foreman's door at about 10:15 that night. My armament consisted of a big Colt's Frontier revolver, carrying a cartridge like that of a rifle, together with a policeman's baton and a pair of handcuffs borrowed for the occasion. Harrison had a pretty little 2-shot derringer, a short katana or Japanese sword, and a bullseye lantern. He had further, although unknown to me at the outset, brought along a little coil of fine steel wire. Our host for the occasion had provided us with a pile of futons and pillows, a lamp, a brazier of burning charcoal, a kettle of water, a bottle of vermouth, and a pack of cards. He then reverently brought downstairs a handsome ebony and silver crucifix, which he placed on the very spot where the apparition was said to make its appearance. Then, after wasting about half an hour in striving to initiate us into some complicated game of cards, he left us to our own devices. Our preparations after his departure were simple in the extreme. Harrison carefully moved the crucifix to a sort of cupboard under the stairs, and then, bringing out his coil of wire, began to construct a kind of tripwire across the room at the height of a man's knee. This accomplished, we spread our bedding, lighted our cigars, and chatted peacefully till midnight, when we extinguished the lamp, lighting the dark lantern in its place, and got ready for business. It was arranged that I was to keep watch till 2 a.m, when my chum was to relieve me. His breathing soon announced that he was asleep, and then a deathly silence prevailed, broken only by the occasional boom of the bell of the neighbouring temple and the monotonous chant of the priests on guard, who struck their little wooden bells in rhythm to the perpetual Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, to thee, O most excellent Buddha, repeated again and again for minutes at a time without intermission. Beyond this, the cheepy-chirpy song of a cricket somewhere in the room, the aforementioned breathings of my comrade, and the occasional screech of an owl or nightjar outside, there was not a sound. And as will happen at such times, thoughts of all kinds came crowding to my brain. I suppose the thought foremost in my mind was how much teasing we'd face about our lonely vigil if no spook decided to show up. Then I smiled to myself as I thought of our wire entanglement and the sacred symbol in the cupboard under the stairs. Next, a brilliant idea struck me. I would remove all the lethal weapons from Harrison's reach, rig myself out as much like a ghost as possible, and, when the temple bell announced that my vigil was up, give my chum a trifling surprise. It might mean a bit of practical jiu-jitsu, and so I'd better get the entanglement down first. It must be getting near 2 now, and good heavens, what was that? A curious greenish spot of light appeared on the lath and plaster wall on one side of the room at about 3 feet from the floor, a kind of indefinable halo about an invisible centre. And it was spreading, expanding on all sides. Slowly I slid my left hand up over my companion's mouth, giving it at the same time sufficient lateral motion to ensure awaking him, while with my right hand I grasped my revolver and brought it out from under the edge of my covering futon. Still keeping my eyes on the light, I seemed to be suddenly aware that the centre of it was assuming a human form, becoming condensed as it were, and darkening meanwhile. Then, as though actuated by a common impulse, both of us sat up, and as we did so the form stood out clearly. It was that of an old man dressed in the wing-like shoulder adornments of the feudal days, with hakama, a kind of baggy, trouser-like nether garment. His hair done up in the quaint top-knot style of 3 decades ago, and in his right hand an antique iron war fan. The figure stood out clearly against the halo of light which seemed to emanate from behind it, and it advanced slowly a couple of paces along the mats until just in front of the tokonoma, or seat of honour such as one finds in all Japanese rooms, and there made a profound obeisance, bowing deeply. "Good heavens," whispered Harrison. "Why, it's gone right through 3 of the wires." As he spoke, the figure proceeded across the room through 2 more of the wires, towards the karakami, or sliding paper shutters which masked a cupboard. Here it stopped, and the mysterious light, which had hitherto always seemed to keep behind the figure, commenced so to envelop it that its outlines gradually became blurred. It was going, and I fired and then fired again. Harrison first fired his derringer and then flung his sword, which drove through the tough paper doors and remained with its square point fixed in the plaster of the wall. But the figure had gone. Then we struck lights and looked at one another like a pair of idiots, while our host, Dos Santos, came to the top of the stairs, and behind him we caught a glimpse of his family huddled together like a flock of frightened sheep. And then, well, I took a pull at my pocket pistol and handed it to my friend, who seemed almost as much a tremble as I confess I was. Just as we were giving the thrilling details of our experience, there came a thundering knock at the door, and a voice cried,
"What the devil's the matter here? What for you shoot into my house for?"
It was only the man living in the house next door, about 50 yards off, a Belgian who had married a local wife and become a Japanese subject by naturalization. He was in his pyjamas and a rage, for my 2 bullets had gone through the 2 flimsy lath and plaster walls and across the intervening space, and one had lodged in his pillow only a few inches from his head. Of course, we had to explain and apologise, and ultimately he quieted down.
Yes,
He was pleased to say.
yes, if you was killed a ghost, it was good. Mine own peoples was afraid from him.
And he went home and was kind enough next day to send me the bullet from his pillow. There is little more to be said. The unfortunate Dos Santos and his tribe vacated the house at once, and it was not taken by Harrison and myself. No report of our adventure got about the town, the Dos Santos family having apparently some reason of their own for keeping the thing quiet, and our Belgian friend being apparently too phlegmatic to think more of it. Only once when I met him did he remark jovially,
Have you yet killed no more ghosts, mine friend? Have you shoot no more people's pillows?
The exigencies of my work took me away from Yokohama for some months, and on my return I found that the house where we had had the curious experience I've related had been torn down, and a new one was being erected in its stead. Curious to relate, underneath it was found a hole, manifestly the abode of one of the smaller carnivora, and apparently of an Obake, or badger. And a little while afterwards, a still more curious discovery was made. In the garden attached to the house were 2 wells, one of which had been disused for years. When the new house was built, some men were sent down to clean the old well out, and there at the bottom they discovered a human skeleton, as well as some enamelled silver hair ornaments. The skeleton was examined by 3 doctors, 2 English and 1 Japanese. They, without knowing anything of the hair ornaments, expressed the opinion that the remains were those of a young Chinese girl, and that they had probably lain there for several years. And, as the ornaments were just those worn by the better class of Chinese women, they were probably correct. As to whether there are such things as ghosts, I now have my own opinions.
Some places carry more than one kind of ghost, not just spirits, but memories of real people and long-buried secrets. The shape-shifting Obake in this house took on the guise of an old warrior, perhaps a reflection of the past tragedies hidden there. When the house was torn down, 2 discoveries were made. One, a den for a shape-shifting badger, the other holding the remains of a young Chinese maiden. Was she a captive from the Sino-Japanese war of the time, brought here by a man of authority, a shogun or soldier whose spirit refused to let go? Perhaps the Obake took his form to reveal this story, trapped in a cycle of sorrow and mystery that now haunts our narrator. Because sometimes the shadows of history run deeper than folklore, hiding just beneath the surface in bug-eyed tales.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this tale, please show your support by liking and subscribing to the Bug-Eyed Tales channel. Your encouragement helps us spin more yarns for your listening pleasure. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.